How is everyone doing? This is going to be a special episode because we are joined today by Mr. Felipe, which is one of our instructors here at the Hit Music Studio. And we are going to try to have hopefully a very productive conversation to try to help parents and especially adults that may be interested in learning how to play guitar. So, what is the best electric guitar or acoustic guitar to start on, especially which one of those two is a better choice? So thank you, Mr. Felipe, for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Being a part of this podcast. And today we want to do this episode because we constantly get this question. Our front desk, I would say almost daily, gets a little bit of like, should I start with electric or should I start with acoustic? And the problem is that the answer is not a 30-second answer. You know, I wish we could in 10 seconds be like, you should do this. There's a lot of back and forth, and we're going to try to cover some of that today. But part of like the biggest challenge that we have is that electric and acoustic guitar are not particularly one of the easiest instruments to learn in. So if again, Mr. Felipe, if you want to almost like talk a little bit about why the guitar in itself is not necessarily an easy instrument to begin, especially if you're trying to learn an instrument and you have multiple options.
Of course. So the main thing is that in a guitar, to produce sound, you have to coordinate right versus left hand. And then at the same time, you have to create what we call calluses, kind of like an athlete that develops callus over their hands so that when they get a ball in their hands, then they're not hurting. Essentially, like the tips of the fingers have to be calloused so that not only you don't get hurt, but you also create a nice even tone.
Yes. I was talking to a customer yesterday, and I almost feel like every single instrument has a learning curve, and those learning curves can be very different for the first probably 3 months, 6 months. And now that doesn't mean that they all stay the same. That is always easy to learn this one versus the other one. I think any instrument, if you want to play it properly, you're going to have to really spend some time. You're really going to have to spend some years doing this, and hopefully you like it and want to stick with it. But I do believe that the beginning can be very different. And that is part of like something that I think is important for people to be aware. Because if you love an instrument and someone tells you like, look, this is pretty challenging, it's good for you to put in the work and can almost do the effort. Now, one of the things that we can say is, what would you say if Mr. Felipe is the easiest instrument to start on?
Piano.
Now, piano, why? Because the sound production is done for you.
Yes.
If you press a key on a piano, if the piano works and is in tune, and it's especially if it's a keyboard, that note is technically perfect. It's already perfectly sounding. It's a nice tone. It's done for you. In guitar, one of the biggest challenges I feel it's the combination, as Mr. Felipe said, is the combination of the two hands. And if you can explain a little bit kind of like what do we do, and this is almost like, of course, like a general thing, what does the right hand do versus the left hand that is so different at the beginning?
So for right-handed players, which are maybe like 90%, 95%, it's going to be right hand plucking the strings, or in our case, playing with a pick, because we mostly focus on pop music. And then the left hand is going to take care of the frets, meaning like the spaces on the neck of the guitar on the fretboard.
Yes, and it's almost like the right hand is aiming in a very, very small space. You're aiming to hit a string, hitting it correctly, which is challenging. And on the left hand, you are trying to put pressure in a very specific way, in a very specific place. So those two, it's almost like at the same time, left and right brain, like maxed out on the ability.
Yeah.
So I think definitely the guitar is a beautiful instrument, has a lot of like cons, but at the same time has a ton of pros. And I really believe that it's an instrument that if you like to play it, you should definitely stick with it. Part of the thing is be aware of the beginning. Now, if we can go a little bit more into, I guess, electric versus acoustic guitar, let's talk a little bit briefly about what are the main kinds of guitars, because part of the thing, and now there's even like some hybrids that are like, it's getting harder to be like, okay, this is this type of guitar. But mainly we have, what would you say, 3 types of guitars?
I would say the big 3 groups are going to be the classical nylon string guitar, called the classical guitar.
Okay.
Then we got the folk acoustic guitar, which is acoustic, but metal strings.
Yes.
And then finally we got the electric guitar.
Now, out of those, part of like the biggest challenge that we have is that us as guess as guitar players, guitar teachers, it's very easy to identify which one is which. But we get customers all the time that bring a guitar, and you ask them. They sometimes bring the guitars to us so we can change the strings. You say, what kind of guitar are you bringing? I don't know. Like, but what kind of strings does it have? I don't know. They don't know. But like a lot of the strings, kind of like almost, it's hard to know which one is which. If we can say this almost generic thing, the acoustic guitars have two types of strings. Even though they look similar, ones are made out of metal and the other ones are technically made out of plastic. That's why it's nylon, right? And that's a little bit of a generalization because some of the strings it's almost like a mixture of those 2.
Mhm.
But the biggest difference is that in nylon strings, they're gonna be less harsh on your fingers. So it's gonna be a little bit easier to push them down and not feel pain, right?
Basically, that's it. Yeah.
And
Starting
they
out.
also have less tension. Now, I really believe, and this is once again a little bit of a generalization, but I really believe that when you're dealing with an acoustic guitar with metal strings, those guitars are, let's say, thought of being played by a pick, which is part of the reason that they're not as harsh on your fingers. You can play them with your fingers as well, but a lot of people choose to play them with a pick, which is almost like, of course, that way you're not running your skin on metal. It's a little bit like less harsh. But what would you say is the biggest difference between those two guitars in terms of like the sizing of them? Because one thing, it's almost like we have a couple of guitars here behind me on the shot. Guitars are not, and I wish this was the case, which is almost like unfortunate. The guitars are not built in a generic size. A lot of guitars can be very different sizes depending on the brand, depending on the model. Now, I think recently companies started to make guitars that are almost like smaller sizes, even though they're not necessarily intended for kids. And I think it's getting a little bit confusing. One of the things that I found recently, because my mom started to play guitar, and I went into the process of trying to get a guitar for her. And it was interesting because I was doing some research and I found out that one of the biggest measurements in guitar is from the nut all the way to, I believe it's the body.
Right.
So if I can show you guys in this guitar, you can take a tape measure and measure it from, let me see if I can get it in the shot. So it's almost like it will be from here all the way to here. And that measurement is a very specific measurement that you can almost, let's say, go on Amazon if you're considering two guitars, and you can get an idea, okay, is it 36 inches or 35 or whatever it is. But the problem with that is that what would you say is the difference between a folk guitar and I guess a metal string guitar in terms of like the difference in the dimensions? Because they have difference in the dimension based on the fact that they're intended almost for different kinds of music.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. They're not always used in the same genres.
Yeah.
So because of that, you have the folk acoustic being a little bit smaller in body than are we comparing classical, right?
Yeah, classical and folk.
Exactly. And then the neck of a folk acoustic is going to be less, it's more narrow.
Yeah.
So that allows kind of like the fingers to wrap around the neck a little bit easier on the left hand. But of course, you got the trade-off, which is the metal strings being a little harsher on the fingertips.
On the fingers, yeah. And one of the things that I feel like for us, we're trying to, and we'll try to give you some recommendations, because we're not trying to like do all this thing and at the end of this video for you to be like, okay, I don't know what to do, what to start with. But I really believe that in this process, you can think of two things. One is, what style do you want to play? What style do you see yourself playing long term? Let's try to, or another generalization, say folk metal string guitars, I would say are more for like, I guess, rock, contemporary, or folk kind of music that is played with an acoustic guitar. Now, what styles of music do you think you play in a classical guitar?
So, like the name implies, classical music originally. It's the oldest guitar out of those three that we're talking about today.
Okay.
And then you also have Latin music being very influenced by it. 60s folk music sometimes.
Almost like, let's say, boleros.
Exactly.
That type of music, rancheras, music for,
Exactly.
Spanish music, flamenco music is, as far as I know, probably never played on a metal string guitar.
Yeah. It's not part of the style, right?
It's not part of the style. Yeah. They have a different sound. Now, one of the things that someone told me a long time ago is that the neck of a classical guitar is intended for you to play more, lines, I guess, more like melodies type of thing. So it's almost bigger on purpose, so you have more space to do certain things. And that, for someone that is a beginner, it would make it more challenging.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to basically reach a little bit higher.
You have to reach a little bit higher.
Yeah.
So now, if we can somewhat simplify it, so we're probably gonna have to do more than one episode on this topic because it's a long conversation. But what between the folk and the classical guitar, which is your recommendation? Which would you think it like if someone goes like, just tell me which one? What do you think is the best?
If you're choosing
thing?
between those two, then the folk acoustic is your best bet, and the reason why is because of its versatility. Now you have to know the
Yes.
trade-off. It is going to be a little bit harsher on your fingers, but you're going to be able to play more styles.
Yes. And now, if I can show you guys here, because conveniently I have it here too.
Some technical
One second,
difficulties.
it's stuck. So this is a guitar that I love. It's hard to get in this shot, but this is a metal string guitar. It's technically a folk guitar, but it's not full size. And that is something that we definitely want to talk about because now a lot of companies are making guitars that are what is being called 3/4 of a size. Now, part of the problem, if you can help me put it up there.
I'll just hold it.
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, we can do that. Now, that guitar that Mr. Felipe is holding is a guitar that I play every day that I teach, and I love it. It's not a full-size guitar, but I don't need a full-size guitar. Part of the thing that sometimes people get almost like, sometimes I think in music, a lot of people think that bigger is going to be better. It's almost like everything bigger, heavier is going to be better. And I can tell you, as someone that is trying to learn, that's not the case. When I was very young, I wanted the biggest piano that I could buy with the most amount of keys, super heavy, Now, I literally recently purchased one of the smallest pianos or keyboards that I have ever owned. And I'm excited because if I take it to a gig, I know it's super light. It's going to be easy to put it in a case. So playing a smaller guitar is always going to be easier. So if you are an adult, and I guess if you play in the NBA, you may need a bigger guitar because your fingers are probably big enough that they're not going to reach in my guitar. But for me, I'm kind of like 5'8". I don't need a huge guitar. And I actually like the fact that it's not that big, the body's not that big, and for me, it's easier to almost play and carry around and all that. But it's a wonderful guitar. Now, let's talk a little bit about electric guitar, because that is almost like the third bracket of like what are the main kinds of guitars. And that's a little bit of where we're gonna probably will be leading to tell you that that's one of the things that we think is gonna be really beneficial for a beginner.
Absolutely.
So, what is an electric guitar? What kind of why is that guitar that you were holding and not considered an electric guitar? And actually, the red one and the blue one behind me are electric guitars.
A big point of difference is the resonator, meaning like the acoustic guitar has its own resonance. You don't need to plug it in for it to sound loud.
It pretty much has a box.
It has a box.
Pretty much, they have a hole, they have a box, and the strings make a sound into that box.
So how do you replace that on an electric guitar?
Yeah, well, an electric guitar, and this is a big con that I see almost parents go like, ooh, I don't know if I want that. You need an amplifier. So in an electric guitar, the pickups, it's almost like a specialized microphone that goes in the guitar that literally grabs the sound, but you need a separate device to make that sound into the sound that we all know as like rock, etc. Kind of like sound that we, I guess, associate with electric guitar. I don't think, and we can see if Mr. Felipe agrees, I don't think needing an amp should be a place that parents, and if you're an adult, should go like, oh no, I just want an acoustic one.
Oh no, yeah.
Because we do believe, and we both were talking a little bit before we started the episode, that electric guitar is the best choice. Now, let's talk a little bit about why would that be? Like, why, even if someone like my mom, and I almost felt when she started, I felt like I wanted to give her an electric guitar.
Right.
It's almost like, and I know she's a little bit like, well, but I don't know if I'm going to play rock. Still, play and start on an electric guitar is going to be beneficial.
Yeah.
Why
absolutely.
is that?
Just the fact that you have the most versatility, meaning like you could play the most styles. So no matter what type of music you love, I promise you're going to be able to do something with the electric guitar. And because it has different microphone or pickups, as we talked, setups, you can make it sound like basically like different instruments in a way.
Yes. Now the strings when you buy a pack of strings, they have the diameter, and diameter it's a very specific measure, and that's how we talk about what gauge are your strings. Usually we talk about what is the smallest string, what is that gauge. That's important because in acoustic guitars you're looking at almost 12 gauge, right? 12
On acoustic, yes, exactly.
So it's usually that's the gauge of the smallest string. In an electric guitar, for a beginner, we suggest a 9. So that's almost 3 different levels down of less tension on each string. And we really believe that that in itself is probably the best thing that you can do for a beginner, is give them a string that you have to put less energy to push down. Because pushing down is probably the hardest, most challenging thing right at the beginning.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
that tension is less.
Yeah. So if you have less tension, regardless of what the guitar is, I think that would be very helpful. Now, on electric guitars, there's tons of options, tons of brands. It's gotten super competitive, in the last, 10, 20 years, there's a lot of different options. But we really believe that if you are the kind of person that goes like, well, but I don't know if I want to play rock, well, as he said, there's a lot of options. One of the options that we want to recommend is, ideally, you want to get an amplifier, but there are things called a headphone amp, which is a small device, and some of them are $20, $30.
Yeah.
You plug it into the guitar. Some of them, and we actually own some of them. We don't have them in this room, but it's almost like a little device that you put into the hole where the cord goes in, and you plug headphones into it. And that immediately gets you a pretty pleasant sound that you can practice, not annoy your family or your neighbors. You don't have to make a lot of noise.
Right.
And then if you really feel like you like what you're doing, then you can invest into an amp. Now, if we can talk a little bit about briefly, like how much is a decent electric guitar?
I would say you want to spend at least $150.
Yeah.
So that you don't have to be like constantly tuning, constantly changing strings, or just having like a really, really bad sound.
Part of what I almost see in instruments, and I used to a long time ago sell musical instruments. They have brackets, and companies compete in those brackets. So $100 guitar is very similar in all companies. A $300 guitar is very similar in all companies. So it's almost like if you start comparing different companies in price points, those are very comparable instruments, because they are trying to, if you have that budget, they're trying to make you purchase their instrument. I would say $100 guitars are, and we almost had some of those at the very beginning when we started doing lessons, they tend to break very easily, then tend to not sound great. So if you go to the next bracket, which is almost close to 200, I think you're getting away from bottom of the barrel,
And you're just like saving yourself money and not having to reinvest. Like if you get hooked and you really want to continue, I promise you're going to change that $100 guitar. So you might as well just go directly into the $200 guitar, $150.
Absolutely. Now, out of the $200, then the next bracket, I would say, is probably over $300. $350, so it's almost like if you spend $225, it's the same as spending $200, or it's $175. So it's almost like if you want to really go to the next level, you probably need to get to $300, $350 to see a difference. Now there's tons of colors and things, and sometimes when people go, okay, I want it black or I want it white, and that's a whole different conversation. But for us, it's very important to try to give you guys information to get started. So if we can almost like start summarizing, we want to take a couple questions here from some of our registered customers. We want to talk a little bit about, if someone comes into you and says, okay, what kind of guitar should I buy?
Electric
guitar.
That's the short and easy answer.
I also now recently would try to say something. I would say try to get a 3/4 guitar. Now in electric guitars, that may not be necessary, but if you are into acoustic guitars, I would absolutely recommend getting a 3/4 guitar, because it's smaller, and by being smaller, it's easier to manage. Especially one of the things, and I was telling this to my mom, a big guitar feels like, and actually my mom started with a guitar that I thought it was not the correct choice for her, and she said like, I can't even hold it. She said, I can't even hold it. I can't even kind of like sit down and have it not fall almost to the ground. that is a big problem, because at the beginning you want to try to spend your time and effort trying to learn how to play, not learn how to, just kind of like
Not
hold
let it slip and break it. Yeah.
Yeah, but in an electric guitar, would you recommend a full size guitar or a 3/4? And we're talking for, let's say, more adults,
Right. No, I mean, like, just because they tend to be slimmer, I wouldn't
It-
really push for the 3/4 on an electric. No.
Okay,
Yeah.
except the child is young.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, if a child is, I would say, younger than 12, and this has to do with heights, if a child is 7, I don't think they should play a full size
Full
electric
size,
guitar.
Yeah, exactly. They'll get frustrated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that is important on that is almost like, okay, a small guitar. It's a lot of companies call it mini, so there's like, it's almost like it's probably like almost a half a size guitar, right?
Right.
So the minis, a mini would probably need to be replaced when the child gets older. But I also say this to people, and they think this because we have had, and I'm sure you have had this too. You have this 6-year-old that shows up to lessons, and it's like, well, my grandpa wants me to play, and this is the guitar that he gave me. And it's like,
It's old
not only,
grandpa's guitar.
it's like a huge guitar, super heavy, old.
As big as the child.
Yeah, as is. Yeah. They come in struggling to just make it to the lesson because they're carrying it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I really believe in, and if you tell this to someone, this wouldn't make sense. If you say, okay, if you take your child and you put them in soccer, you're not gonna give them your shoes and be like, okay, you're gonna go play a game with my 10 and a half shoes to a 7-year-old.
Right.
But then people do that with the guitar, and it'd be like, oh, this is my guitar, you should go take lessons with it. It's almost like that doesn't make sense. I would say 12-year-old is almost the puberty.
Yeah,
Is almost
exactly,
the
stretch.
break point to like, okay, you're ready for a full size guitar.
Right.
But
Agree.
once again, these are hopefully like almost like ideas into how to get this process started. So we're gonna take a couple of questions from people that we in advance asked them. And by the way, if you guys wanna send us a question for so we can answer it in one of these episodes, do it to support@thehitmusicstudio.com. That's gonna be the email that we're gonna use. So you can send it with the subject podcast question, and we'll try to take and include those in future episodes. Now. One of the best questions that we get, and this is it's almost like it makes me laugh a little bit. So let's you could take a shot at it first. It's like, how long would it take for me to learn?
Just because it's just because it's a guitar, it's gonna take longer than most other instruments.
Yeah, and it's interesting
long
because
learning curve.
at the beginning of me teaching, God, it's been almost 20 years. I almost felt like, well, learning is it's a never-ending thing, right?
Right.
But I almost feel like that's a question that's not the answer that I don't know, almost appeases anyone.
Yeah, it's a philosophical question more than anything.
So I can tell you this, because this is almost my current answer to that question is, you're probably going to be a beginner for at least a year. Now, that depends on how much you practice. Do you want to shorten that time? If you practice 2 hours a day, you're probably going to not be a beginner for a year. If you practice an hour a month, you're probably going to be a beginner for longer than a year.
Absolutely.
So now, how do you not be a beginner? I think when you're not a beginner anymore, you can start having access to playing cooler things, maybe playing with other people. But at the same time, there's always going to be songs that are going to kick your butt.
Yep.
So
Yep,
it's
that's the
almost
idea.
like, I think as a musician, you can be like, oh, like this, I can do this, or you pick up a solo for a song that you like, and I can play it, and then all of a sudden you get a song and you go like, whoa, like that's gonna take me a long time. But that's part of the fun. I think it shouldn't be like you should be discouraged. I tell people too, it depends on the song. Some songs may take you 3 months, 6 months.
Oh yeah.
Some songs may take you 5 years. So it really depends. One song that to me was always funny is Stairway to Heaven. If someone goes to me like, I want to learn how to play Stairway to Heaven, it's like from a beginner, right? Like never touch a guitar.
Okay.
So how long will you say Stairway to Heaven takes to play properly?
Yeah, let's start now and we'll finish maybe like 2 years from now.
Yeah, I would say even longer. One thing, and if you guys know about Stairway to Heaven, if you're young, you should definitely look it up. It's a masterpiece in guitar playing. But Jimmy Page, which I don't know too much about his background, but he used almost every single technique that he has, and he's a really good guitar player. But in that song,
the
he
best.
almost plays with his fingers. He plays a really good solo. He does all kinds of like almost harmonic things. It's a wealth of playing. And of course, it's really, really challenging because when you start dealing with the techniques, it's okay. Maybe you can play the intro, but the solo is almost like, it's a whole different thing. And to play it correctly and in time, it's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
So very cool. I don't know if we have any more questions. Any other things that come in mind?
I mean, customers ask us about brand type. And then that we could get into as well. We should
do a separate episode, but we can mention it kind of like quickly. What brands do you recommend, or what do you think?
We mostly go for classic Fender Squires. Those are always a good entry level guitar. Ibanez does a good. I'm not sure what it's called. We don't use it as much. And then there's one more brand that is a little more affordable and it's still pretty good. Rogue.
Okay.
Rogue has some decent instruments, so
yeah. One of the things, and I can tell you once again, because a long time ago I was in the music selling side of music, selling equipment. One thing that I find with guitars, and this happens with not all instruments, it doesn't really happen on pianos, for example, electric pianos, digital pianos. In guitars, you have someone that is potentially assembling them by hand. And one of the things with cheaper guitars is that it's a Russian roulette of getting a decent guitar. You purchase like let's say an off-brand on Amazon. You may get a very decent guitar that plays well, and you may get a guitar that plays terrible.
Yeah.
And the problem is that if you're a beginner, chances are you're not gonna know which one is which. So you start playing, it doesn't sound good, and it's almost like you don't know that it's adjusted really, really poorly.
Yeah,
type of thing.
Absolutely. You might get reviews that say that guitar is really good for beginners, and then you get the messed up one just because there's no standardized, like I guess like streamlined process of manufacturing.
So I think brands that are recognizable. I really like Ibanez. The red one behind me on this side is an Ibanez. Ibanez to me it's a very like good company, like good products. We have multiple Ibanez. We have never had problems other than usage, normal usage. Like things break because we use them a lot. Sometimes we use them a lot of hours a day. But we have never had an issue with an Ibanez product. Fender too, I think is really good. Very almost like a little bit generic, I guess, in my taste. But also like for a reason, they have the brand recognition that they have.
It won't break down on you. Yeah. That's guaranteed.
But I guess if you want to go with an off-brand thing, I think it is a little bit of a Russian roulette. Well, we can do an episode of maybe kind of like finding or like navigating that space of all the brands and all that stuff. But we want to close this up by telling you guys thank you for watching the episode. For us, we're going to continue to do episodes like this of helping people with gear, but at the same time, we're going to be talking about practice tips, bring some of our teachers so they can share their knowledge and their experiences in the classroom. And at the same time, if you want to be almost send us questions, do that to support@thehitmusicstudio.com. So thank you so much for watching. We would love to see you guys on a following episode, and take care. We'll see you soon.